My lord, there's been a raven from River Run.
Lord Brandon Stark, it has come to my attention that your betrothal to Lady Catelyn will be sealed before the old guards and the new in the spring. I cannot allow this to pass without defending the honor of Lady Catelyn. I challenge you
in armed combat. I await you at River Run. Peter Baelish.
Gentlemen, the time has come once again to discuss things.
Hi everyone, welcome to another episode of Geeky Gentlemen. I am Sid Part 2. Joining me today is Rasco of Rasco's Modern Life. Hello, Rasco.
Hey.
Well, we are here today to continue our fan series review, where we review things made by fans of different properties. Rasco chose a fan film this week. Rasco, what are we reviewing?
The Wild Wolf, Game of Thrones prequel fan film.
Indeed. So Game of Thrones is like a property that you and I both like quite a bit. But with many things set in a particular era, even though Game of Thrones is of course fantasy, it's still set in a medieval-esque setting. Game of Thrones is a very difficult thing to do fan films for.
Yeah.
Because, you know, castles and knights and shit.
Yeah.
So to pull off a Game of Thrones fan film, like even just doing something as simple as like shooting a scene in the woods somewhere, right? Not that Game of Thrones has many of those, but like shooting a scene in the woods is just still incredibly difficult because then you have to have great costuming. And even then you like, what are you going to tell a story about? Like, are you going to do an encounter with a fantasy creature or something like that? Like, what would your Game of Thrones scene in a woods be? Like, I suppose you could do a fan film about the Brotherhood without banners. But there's just, like, a lot that goes into doing anything fan-related that's set in a particular historical era. So this fan film, though, I feel does a damned impressive job of pulling off location scouting, if nothing else.
Yeah, I think that, like, it's really surprising how much they actually had to work with and how much it actually really does kind of look like the kinds of sets they shoot on when it comes to Game of Thrones. Because I know that there aren't, like, obviously there are a lot of, like, actual castles that they go to shoot certain things. Like, I know, like, there's an actual castle that they go to shoot things that went, like, for Winterfell and stuff like that. And then, of course, there's sets, but, like, here, obviously, you kind of have to just find locations, and, like, that's the thing where it's like, I don't know if they had to go extremely out of their way, or if they just got lucky and all of this stuff was readily available, but it's impressive because, I mean, they really are almost all entirely, like, things that really do fun. They could easily fit somewhere in the actual world of Game of Thrones, and so it's really shocking how it's like there's like not really anything that looks like it couldn't be in Game of Thrones in this.
I would push back on that a little bit with regard to the location. When they're inside the Tully Castle, and like not inside the courtyard of the castle, but like in an interior room of the castle, and like the Sansa, or not Sansa, what's her name? Stark mother.
Catelyn Stark?
Yeah, Catelyn. When Catelyn's brother, who I think that's supposed to be, when he is sitting there talking to someone about like Brandon Stark's fighting style and all this stuff, and they're in that white room, like it's got the set dressing, it's got like the fireplace, it's got the weapons and stuff on the wall, and it's even got exposed wood beams. But just something about that didn't look Game of Thrones to me, you know? Like I really was trying to rack my brain after I saw that, how many interior rooms we've seen in Game of Thrones that are just, for lack of a better word, simple white walls. Like it's as far as my brain can tell, it's either stone or like, what would the term be? Wood and fabric in front of stone to give a warmer interior look. And like part of that's just the way that castles are built. I don't know like how much we want to talk about this because this isn't really related to the episode, but like there's this really interesting archaeology project where it's like a class or a research group that is attempting to build a castle with only the resources available to people in medieval times. Like, and it's stretched a little bit. Like, they have a guy in, just imagine like a human-sized hamster wheel that's running stuff up. Like, he'll run the wheel, and it's like a whole system of levers and pulleys to get things to the top of the castle. And that's like a Roman invention, so conceivably someone could have redone it, but, you know, whatever. But like the tenet of building medieval style castles is the taller you want your structure to be, the thicker it has to be. Which is why like a lot of castle windows are very, very thin, because you don't have a lot of room to work with. The taller you want something to be, the thinner it has to be. That's why a lot of castles, when you think castle, you think dark, lit by torches. It was of necessity that they had to be lit by torches and fireplaces. So, as you get into more modern architecture in the Renaissance era and in the more Gothic era, like with cathedrals and everything, they're able to get away from that by having, you know, flying buttresses and all that stuff. That, like, when I say flying buttress, you know what I mean, right? Okay. I'll take that for granted. But, like, they're able to get away with that and have thinner walls, do more extravagant stuff. And then as you get Renaissance, you're able to get, like, you know, plaster and stuff like that. So you have thin white walls, kind of like what we have today. I was really, really racking my brain trying to think if anything came to mind for an interior room that looked like that in Game of Thrones. And so that was the one thing that stood out to me. But for that to be the one thing as far as set location in a Game of Thrones fan film, fucking wow, that's impressive.
Yeah, I agree. That's maybe the only like iffy location, and even then, I don't think there ever has been a room that's looked quite like that. But it's not out of the realm of possibility, and so I mean, it's not a big problem. And yeah, I mean, the fact that that's really the only place you can point to that's really telling. That like everything else, it's just like, even here's one of the things I loved. Just at the creek at the ending where Littlefinger gets sliced, That looked exactly like a creek out of Game of Thrones, which may sound like obvious, like, okay, it's just a creek. But no, not all creeks look alike. That really looked a lot like the creek that they were by, like...
It was really stony.
Yeah.
It's shallow to begin with. Yeah, like, I mean, I got creeks and rivers. I'm in Fort Wayne. It's called the town of three rivers and all this stuff. Like, we got creeks and rivers all over the place, but we have, like, muddy banks and, you know, they're steep banks. They're not like a shallow, rocky creek like that. And that looked really good. Yeah, I totally agree. The location scouting in this is on point. It looks really, really good. There's also the costuming. You know, like, obviously, armor is kind of an easier thing to costume because there are a lot of places that sell, like, pieces of armor, and if you just have to get, like, the right feel for, like, metalworking. But, I mean, Peter was wearing chainmail around his neck. That just sells it, man. It just looks good. Mm-hmm. And then there's, like, the other subtle stuff, like the girls' costumes in this. Catelyn and Liza look great. That looks like the kind of dresses that, you know, you see characters wearing in Game of Thrones. And what's really impressive is it looks like northern dresses. It looks like, you know, season 1 Sansa kind of dresses. Where it's, like, supposed to be, like, a little more conservative kind of thing.
Yeah, it's, like, dark brown and leather. Like, well, that's with, like, the men, and with, like, the women, oftentimes it's, like, greens and reds, and then they'll have, like, something over their, like, shoulders oftentimes and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was really, really impressed by the amount of attention to detail. There's, like, the Mister...
Maester, I think. Yeah,
Maester, thank you. There's the Maester... And, like, he's got the chain on him and everything. It looks really, really good. This does feel like it could come right out of Game of Thrones. And then the other really impressive part is the, with the Tullys. He's even got the fish pendant holding his robes together.
Yeah. That
looks great. That is an insane amount of detail and just adds a great amount of authenticity to this. The actors' ages look pretty fitting as well, especially considering, you know, medieval era kind of stuff. So, like, I don't know, man. I totally buy a lot of the production side of this stuff.
Yeah, all of that's really impressive, and you can tell that, like, it wasn't one of those things where they couldn't have possibly, like, moved forward without getting all of those things in place. Like, there was a lot of prep work, I'm sure, that had to go into this, which is, like, really impressive because, like, sometimes I feel like people can get really intimidated by how much stuff they have to do before they even start shooting anything.
Oh, definitely.
And it can be really intimidating. You're like, oh my God, well, like, to even get there, I have to do all of this prep work, and it's just to do this one thing. And to like see something where clearly so much had to go into the prep work, so much had to go into all of the costumes, because there are quite a few extras that they have, and they're all in costumes.
Mm-hmm.
Like that.
Yeah, there's no guy with jeans and a t-shirt walking through the background, right?
It's a Gatorade bottle.
Yeah, that's all really, really impressive. One thing, the makeup and you know, the makeup effects for this, like when Brandon Stark comes across that rapist in the woods and he's been, like, tortured and stuff.
Yeah,
those injuries look great. Like, it's not just that they, like, dumped fake blood on him. It looks caked and dried. It looks like he's, like, fallen in the mud before they strung him up there.
Yeah.
And the bruise, like, the swelling on his face looks legit.
Yeah, it looks like, because it's weird, because it doesn't look like he was just beat up. It looks like he was beat up and he's, like, a day or two out from it. Mm-hmm. And it's kind of, like, starting to do that. It's, like, a different kind of swelling when you're, like, first beaten from, like, a day later. Like in Daredevil, you see the Punisher's face is, like, always swollen because he's been beaten up sometime within the past week or so. Like Daredevil season 2, it's kind of like that. And this, it's kind of like that as well, where you're like, you could just really tell that guy's been pounded, but it doesn't look like amateurish makeup at all. Like, it looks really well done and really intentionally, like, crafted to look just perfect.
Yeah, and when Littlefinger gets cut in the stomach at the end of this, the stomach and the chest, that is a really, really impressive effect. They got a close-up on it, and it looked great.
Yeah.
Admittedly, it's, like, covered in blood, but that just helps sell it. And, like, it's weird because you almost want to cringe and look away. It's such a believably done thing. I was really, really impressed with all the production value behind this thing. This was a really, really strong production. I'm trying to think. Resko, do you think there's another fan film that has put this much into the production value that we've talked about?
The only one... Okay, so City of Scars is obviously up there. There's some pretty impressive stuff there.
Mm-hmm. But even then, that still has that is still, like, a modern-day kind of thing.
Yeah.
And so, like, just, the extras alone make this a little more impressive than that on a production standpoint, because they have extras in costume too, and the costumes for the extras look great.
Yeah, and that's true. And I'm sure. I don't know. I don't think there's been anything where you would expect finding the locations to be as challenging as this, where like it's been handled this well. Like there have been things we've watched where there's just been seamless locations, but it's more like buildings and stuff that actually like exists all around you.
Yeah.
This is different.
Yeah, this is just really impressive. I think I can say unequivocally, like, this has the best production value of everything we've watched. From the sets, the makeup, the locations, the costumes, the just all of that stuff looks really, really good. So let's go ahead and talk about the story. So you didn't watch this before you picked it.
Nope.
I ended up sending you a link to a scene from season 1 of Game of Thrones.
Yeah.
Because I needed that refresher after I watched this the first time. Mm-hmm. Did you watch that before watching this or not?
I did watch it after you told me about it, but I figured I knew what the scene was by the thumbnail, and I was right. I actually just rewatched the first season of Game of Thrones like a few weeks ago, so this was all really fresh in my mind, actually, including that scene. But to me, this was I kind of jumped right into this, and I was like, oh, okay, I know exactly what this story is.
Definitely, yeah. I watched this, and I was like, I remembered Peter Baelish talking about how he was in a duel to try to win Catelyn Stark's hand, or Catelyn Tully at that point's hand, and how he lost in just a complete embarrassing way to Ned Stark's older brother. Like, I remembered that, but it was, like, really, really on the fringes of my mind, and I couldn't really remember all the details of it. So I went and found the scene from the first season of Game of Thrones where he explains that, and that was, like, early Game of Thrones where it was almost, just softcore porn,
Yeah.
which is pretty funny. But, yeah, so I rewatched that, and then I watched this a second time, and man, way to take one little conversation that's in the first season and gets, I'm assuming mentioned in the books without ever being detailed, and turn it into a really epic fan film.
Mm-hmm.
That was cool. I don't know, what'd you think, though?
Okay, my one big complaint is that I almost... Okay, and it's not like a huge thing, and this is like one of those things where you'd have to rewrite it to make this the case, so you shouldn't do that, and this isn't really fair. But I think this would be like a little bit better if it was like really, really focused on Peter Baelish, and it was kind of like it was like more from his perspective solely.
Okay. I could see where you're coming from with that. I kind of like what we get in here, though. I like the approach that they took here, because it has that very particular Game of Thrones thing wherein, how to put this, there's not really a central protagonist, right? Like, we follow Brandon Stark, and we get a really good sense of what kind of guy he is in very simple ways. Mm-hmm. And then we see the context that's happening here. We see what Peter Baelish's perspective is and why he's doing this. and then it's like really, really kind of gray and just leaves it up to you to decide who's the good guy in this situation.
And you're totally right about that. You're absolutely correct. And it is in line with how the show... It's interesting because it is actually very in line with the show. And so I think it's probably actually like... It's more like... I feel like it stays more true to the spirit of the show. But I haven't read the books, but I plan to. I've heard that it's like a limited third-person perspective. So that would work for what I'm saying, like I thought would have been kind of cool. At the same time, you're right in that, like, because this is on YouTube, it maybe fits a little bit better in context with the show, where you don't really get a person's perspective as much as a bunch of perspectives at once, and how, like, other things affect other people differently. And, like, it's interesting how, like, the stories in Game of Thrones, if you just tell them from a different perspective, they almost like fit the structure of a story that is like the reverse. So, like, for example, if you kind of like loosely explain who Joffrey's character is to somebody, you can really easily make it sound like he's like a Harry Potter type chosen one character that's like everyone else is just screwing them over. Like his evil uncle tried to overthrow him. Like Ned Stark tried to overthrow him, and so he had to get rid of Ned Stark, the Hand of the King, horrible guy, and all that kind of stuff. You can really like tell the story however you want.
Yeah,
I'm just rambling at this point.
No, I agree, and that's the interesting thing about Game of Thrones is everybody's the good guy from their own point of view, right? And that's the thing that I find interesting here is like Brandon's like, I mean, he kills a rapist in the beginning. It's hard not to find him a little bit endearing. But then as you're watching him fight Peter, he's like saying, "Oh, I'm not going to kill him, but if he runs his mouth, I might." But I have been itching to. It's like, that's kind of a dick thing to say. But at the same time, he is trying to steal this guy's girl, right? Peter is like standing in the way of this guy and Catelyn getting married. And so that's kind of, that's a reason for him to be pissed off. But then, like, I think where it really turns and where you really start to feel something for Peter legitimately is just in how absolutely demolished he is getting in this fight.
Yeah.
He is by no stretch of the imagination at all capable of keeping up with Brandon Stark. Brandon Stark is fucking toying with him.
Yeah.
And he is a bully here. And, like, it really fits. Like I said, I went back and watched the scene with Peter talking to his prostitutes, and he's like, I read all their stories about how the little guy, as long as he was fighting for the right cause, would always win the day.
Yeah.
That's just what they are. Stories. And I'm like, God, this is so, like, I totally see where that perspective comes from for him now. Like, the time he tried to be the good guy is the time that he got demolished. So, of course, Peter Baelish is Peter Baelish, right?
Yeah.
That is a very believable scenario for me. Also, what I like about not solely focusing on Littlefinger in this is we get Lysa and Catelyn's perspective.
Mm-hmm.
And you really see that, like, Lysa's this girl who has always been in love with Peter, but Peter's always been in love with her sister.
Yeah.
And yeah, that relationship is shown very well here. Like, Peter is in this duel fighting for Catelyn's hand, and who's the one that's worried the most about Peter? Lysa.
Mm-hmm.
That was pretty pointed writing, I thought. I thought that was written very, very well.
Yeah. If anything, what's so impressive is how all of that stuff feeds in, like, all of that stuff so informs Littlefinger as a character, and all of that stuff is just, like, there and not really, they don't call that much attention to it, but they make sure that they always include every one of those relevant details, like, specifically how each of them feel about Peter. One likes him, one couldn't care, and then one couldn't really care less, in a sense, but then to Peter, it's like the exact opposite is what he would want. And stuff like that is really cool. And like that's in Game of Thrones, the show, definitely. And this like really captured that, where there are just a bunch of little details that people will like call back to later. And it will like, that's the thing that they noticed. That's the thing that mattered most to them. And I really like that. Like, it really slows down when Peter's on the ground and he doesn't have his sword in his hand. And you can tell it's just like he's looking and he's like, well, this is why I'm in this fight. I'm doing it for her. I'm doing it for Catelyn Stark. I don't know. It just really works because it's exactly a scene out of Game of Thrones.
Mm-hmm. Yes, exactly.
All the way to the end. All the way to the end with him just getting sliced right in the chest. It's just such a pointed like period to end on.
Mm-hmm. And like again, it's not that he doesn't kind of deserve it. Like Brandon does have a point here. Littlefinger brought this on himself. He's the one that challenged this duel. Mm-hmm. He's the one that refused to back down from it. Like, Brandon kicks the shit out of him from the very beginning, knocks him off the wall and all that shit. And he steps on his sword and legit says to him, "Do you really want to do this?" And Peter nods yes. And he keeps fighting. And then when they're down by the creek and Catelyn runs over, Peter knows he's beaten. He knows he doesn't have a chance of winning. And he is very much aware that he is the only one truly fighting. If anything, Brandon is defending himself and just kind of kicking him every now and again, right? Mm-hmm. He knows that he doesn't have a chance, but it's at that point that he decides to try to fight dirty. And so he really does bring that slice on himself in every conceivable sense. Like, yes, he is the one fighting with love on his side and all that stuff. But he also has earned this by the standards of Game of Thrones, right?
Yeah.
And that's something I'm really impressed by. There's also a line when they're down by the creek that really it floored the hell out of me, and I'm so glad that I caught it the second watch through around, because I think it really makes the whole piece. Is Brandon is clearly pissed. He is angry that this lowborn character would dare try to challenge, his right to a bride, right?
Yeah.
And he says, "You shouldn't fight for someone who doesn't love you." And Littlefinger just snaps right back at him and says, "Heed your own words." And that is that is the moment where he is legit pissed off and ready to kill this fucker. But that is so that is so on point to what, especially from Littlefinger's perspective, was going on here. It's like, he loved Catelyn. I keep wanting to say something else. He loved Catelyn. Brandon wanted a prize. Brandon wanted, to claim Catelyn.
Mm-hmm.
And so that moment is just harsh. Because, he's right, but I don't think you're going to convince him. And that, I don't know, that really worked for me. I think that was some of the, most pointed writing in this entire thing.
Yeah, one of the things I always think is really interesting about the Starks in particular is that it's really interesting because whenever in Game of Thrones, whenever you're seeing, from the perspective of a Stark character, you very much do get these are the good guys sense to some degree. You're like, if there's anybody that I can place on the good side of the spectrum, pretty much definitively it's most Stark characters. But whenever you hear other characters talk about Starks, oftentimes you kind of understand how from the outside it could be actually really irritating to see these people that first they kind of seem just like the facade of good people, oh, they're just too good. They're just too honorable. All of them across the board. It kind of just seems like that just is like a blanket over all of anyone with the last name Stark. There's just this air of honorableness that I can imagine is actually really intimidating and kind of irritating. Jaime Lannister kind of has that relationship with Ned Stark in season 1, where he's just yo, you're such a good guy. Almost like how certain people would feel about Captain America, where it's like, oh my God, you self-righteous prick. You kind of get that, and that's one of the things that I always kind of feel like is very important about like Peter Baelish's character, where it kind of feels like he can't be this like picture perfect big buff hero kind of guy that gets the girl and just fulfills all of those things that like an honorable man does. He can't be that. And this is like that story kind of like in a nutshell. Like this is that story of him kind of making that realization that there's got to be other ways to get what you want besides just doing it the straight-laced like path of the hero type of way. And it doesn't work. Yeah, like reality isn't necessarily on your side just because you see yourself as the good guy, just because you see yourself as the underdog.
Yeah, I agree with that. What do you think of Liza in this? Because this is Liza before she loses her fucking mind,
yes.
Right? What do you think of the way they characterized her?
It's one of those things.
I mean, she doesn't get a ton of development, but
it's one of those things where I don't know if I buy. Okay, I don't know if I buy her being this normal. At least initially, compared to how she turns out. That being said, there always can be that like one bad day. In fact, like we're like literally seeing it in this story. Like this is literally like Peter Baelish's like one bad day. There's always that one thing that could totally just turn you in a different wild direction.
Yeah, and I think there is justification for that happening later on. I looked into like the book history of this event because I wanted to try to get. There's no behind the scenes video from this channel that I could find, so I wanted to try to get more of the background of this event as far as the books go. And like, so after he got cut the fuck open, Liza's the one that helps nurse Peter back to health while he's in recovery, and he's very disoriented because of all the drugs that they're keeping him on. I think they call it milk of the poppy in Game of Thrones. Because of all the drugs that they're keeping him on, she has sex with Peter while he's in recovery, and he calls her Catelyn. They have sex again after he's fully recovered and all this stuff, and she wants to get married to him because she's very much in love with him. He gets her pregnant as a child. She tells her father about this. Littlefinger is banished from the Vale, like the kingdom, the castle, was banished from the castle, sent back to his own home. And Liza is forced to drink a potion that, basically acts as an abortion drug. So if anything's going to push her to that crazy character, I think that is certainly a traumatic enough event.
Definitely, actually. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think that like the groundwork has been laid here for she does truly love this guy and does like she is just clearly devoted and is the only person here that actually cares about him. But that's not good enough for Peter. He wants what he wants, and what he wants is Catelyn. And that is a really harsh, really hard thing for Liza to deal with, but she's still just so devoted. She's defining herself by Littlefinger, and that's really, really interesting.
Yep.
So I like, there's not a ton of development here for that, but there is enough here that I'm like, I can see where this character becomes that, knowing what happens to her later on.
No, yeah, having that explained, that is very actually pretty believable. She doesn't seem like the most stable person in this either, but definitely not crazy. But I could see it.
Yeah, I agree with that. Let's talk about the fight choreography, because we talked about a lot of the production stuff from, but we didn't mention the fight choreography a lot. This is interesting because it's not like it could be a good fight, right? Like, the whole point is that he's just getting demolished. So how do you think they did on displaying that? Because it's like, it's one of those things, it's, if you know how fight choreography works, if you train for fight choreography, and you choreograph fights and participate in this stuff, it gets harder to fight bad. It's like when you train to be an actor and then you're told to like play a bad actor in a movie or something, and you have to act bad. A lot of actors have real trouble doing that. So what do you think of the fight here?
I thought that the fight was pretty good. I thought that what really worked is that they really used the editing to just really give like a heavy impact to every time Littlefinger just gets punched or kicked. Mm-hmm. Like he gets like kicked in the chest after he like almost falls back and like drops his sword. He just gets like kicked in the chest after he like gets up. It's really crazy, and it's just like the perfect hit. And the way it's edited is really, it's just really well done. I thought that was kind of across the board, like where you get sliced in the chest at the very end. That looked really good, I thought. And even sometimes whenever it will cut to like a new angle, they make sure that like they're acting while they're fighting. So like there's this part where he swings at Littlefinger and Littlefinger ducks, and like before he ducks, you can see on his face he's making like a, oh shit, I got a duck face, and I'm like, that's awesome. Like they're actually acting.
Mm-hmm. And that's the other thing I'm really impressed by is there'd be there would definitely be the temptation, I feel, to act as if Littlefinger has absolutely no idea what he's doing. And that's not the case. It's not that he doesn't understand how to fight. The impression I get here is very much that he is overthinking how to fight, how to attack, and that Brandon is not at all. To Brandon, this is second nature. Brandon knows what he is doing and doesn't have to think about it. Peter knows what he's supposed to do and is trying his best, but he can't react quickly enough.
It's interesting because it kind of like mirrors his relationship with Catelyn almost. Okay, so like to him, this battle is like the biggest battle of his life up until this point, right? Like he's fighting for his love, correct? Mm-hmm. So to him, this is a big deal. To Brandon Stark, this is like, oh my god, this fucking nerd is coming after my chick again. Oh my god, I really have to embarrass this guy? Okay, let's get it over with. Mm-hmm. And so it's like to him, he's in the moment. He's not fighting on tilt. Peter is.
Yeah.
That's really
and
that mirrors the relationship because for like to him, it's like Catelyn is everything, and it's definitely not that. It's not reciprocated.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I really like that. It's like, you know, he's trying his damnedest, and so he's not like cowering. It's not like he doesn't know what he's doing. It's not like he's Sam in the first season of Game of Thrones, where he's like clearly has no concept of what the hell he's doing, has no idea how to like hold a sword or anything. He's doing everything technically right that he can, but he is just completely outmatched. And that's really, really an impressive level of physical acting. That is, like, if I were put in a scene and I was told, okay, you're going to have to fight, but you got to be bad at it, you know, there'd be a really big temptation to just, like, you know, swing the sword in awkward ways or not block or something like that. And that's not what he does here. He's holding his own to a degree. Brandon's clearly going easy on him, but he is holding his own.
Yeah.
And I'm really impressed by that.
Yeah, I could imagine there being like other people that he's sparred with before that are worse than him, and he kind of outshines them, but like he's not on the level of someone like Brandon Stark.
I don't know if I'd go that far, but I can see where you're coming from.
Like I could just see I don't imagine Peter gets like whooped like that, you know? I don't imagine that that's a thing he's really experienced up until this point to that degree.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I bet he doesn't get just his ass handed to him. What I bet is he doesn't practice, period. Like, he probably has taken a couple lessons through his life, but he doesn't, you know, make it a routine. He doesn't put the energy into it because he's not interested in fighting. That would be my guess.
It's really interesting because he kind of reminds me of like like a reverse version of Podrick. Like Podrick is kind of like the reverse, where he starts off this kind of like just kind of naive, generally good guy, and he's not really a great fighter. But like it's kind of the reverse, where he seems to be rewarded for the good things that he does, and he's kind of become a more formidable like swordsman in the more recent seasons. Whereas like Peter Baelish kind of went the opposite way, where he's like he just gets screwed over, and so he just became an evil prick who doesn't really fight people but sabotages people.
Nice, yeah, totally.
Podrick is Littlefinger, confirmed.
Podrick is mirror universe Littlefinger. Okay. Is there anything else you wanted to bring up about this? I'm trying to think if there's anything else I wanted to talk about. I like that they talk about the Tully's scale armor. That was neat.
That was cool.
They specifically talk about the engineering behind scale armor. I thought that was cool.
Yeah, that is cool. I'll say the only thing I could nitpick a little bit is that sometimes there's like they probably recorded most of the audio in post.
You think so?
I think so. Sometimes it's really good. Sometimes it's not so good.
I didn't notice it at all, so you're on your own for that one.
Okay, well, there's some scenes where I'm pretty sure it was just really windy or something, and I think they recorded in post. I could be completely wrong about that.
Okay. I think my only nitpick is more related to the scene that like is kind of behind this fan film. And it's like the line is in here, but it's not the line. It's not in the place I want it to be. This is a little nitpicky, but I do think it's worth mentioning. In the show, when Peter is telling his prostitutes about this fight, he says that Catelyn came in and begged for his life for him and said he's just a boy, he doesn't know what he's doing, something to that effect. And in this, Catelyn does say to Brandon, he's just a boy, he doesn't know what he's doing, please don't kill him. But she says that before the fight when Peter's not around, and then she says again, please don't kill him, or something to that effect, when she stops them from fighting briefly. I really wish she'd gone for the full, please don't kill him, he's just a boy, he doesn't know what he's doing, in that moment. I really wish that was the place that line got said, because, man, that is a... Like, when the actor in the real Game of Thrones show delivers that line of what Catelyn said to save his life, you can tell he's held on to that shit, and he is ashamed of it.
Yeah.
And in this, it's just kind of like, it's not, he wouldn't have been able to know that she said that. Like, particularly the lines, he's just a boy.
Yeah,
because it has the context of Brandon being a man.
I agree. It would also kind of work better in the heat of the moment for her to beg for his life, like right there, because that way it would come across like this is what she really thinks. Because, like, she can't think about what she's about to say. She can't cushion it and be like, oh, is this going to offend him if I refer to him as a boy? Like, that's what she really believes. She was trying to save his life, right? Mm-hmm. So it's like, she didn't think about what she said. She just said it. And that's why it would hurt him so bad, because it happened in that moment.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah, and, like, the thing is, you could still make the scene where she's asking Brandon not to kill him before the fight. You could still keep a line from that. It's he's just a boy in the scene beforehand doesn't have the same impact there. Because she says, I've loved him like a brother. That's all Brandon should need for reason not to kill Peter. Mm-hmm. In the moment, he's just a boy. That is more like directed at Peter than it is at Brandon on a subtextual level. And so I feel like it would work better with that line in the moment, and you don't need it earlier in the film. I think you get the same meaning out of the scene earlier in the film by not having it there, and you add meaning to the scene later in the film by having it there. So that's... like, I don't know. Do you think that qualifies as a nitpick, or is that like a legitimate issue with the way the piece is written?
I don't know. It's depends on who you're asking. I'm sure there are some people watching that would say it's a nitpick.
Yeah, I don't know, maybe. It's a tiny thing. It's not going to affect my score, I'll put it that way.
I mean, there's a lot good. Like, this is one of those things where, like, if people listen to this and they're like, oh, you guys are complaining too much, like, literally praised, like, everything about this almost. So shut up.
Yeah. Right. Okay. Let's go ahead and go on to ratings then. I'll go first. Seriously, I've got a little complaint here or there, like the room that they get. I don't think I can place a room like that in my head. That's not enough to take a point off for, because the rest of the location scouting and production value is just top notch. They got the room that they could get. To talk about the scene with the he's just a boy, that's a really subtextual thing. I can totally see why someone would miss that, and it wouldn't occur to anybody until after the fact. I don't know, like, if I would even be aware enough to notice that, like, while I would be writing a piece like this, you know? That is something that I really think you can only pick up on in retrospect. So I can't pull any points from this one. This is a 5 out of 5 for me. I'll give this 5 out of 5 signs indicating someone is a rapist when literacy levels are incredibly low, so that sign would probably not help at all.
People didn't even know how to spell their own names.
Yeah, so, like, what are they gonna look? They're gonna look at that sign and be like, okay, I guess this confirms his story then.
Yeah.
How about you, Rasco?
I'm gonna give. Wait, so what like noun from this did you use, like, for your rating?
I used the signs that indicate.
Oh yeah, I'm
rapist,
sorry. For some reason it just completely evaporated from my mind. Okay, I'm gonna give this. I'm gonna go. You know what? I think that this kind of is like exactly what fan films should like strive to be, where it's something that's like fun from a fan perspective, but there's actual real like filmmaking skill behind it. And then on top of that, it's not just like showing you things you want to see. It's making sure that all of the things that make that event important are also there and developed. So it kind of really does like a million different things that oftentimes fan films get wrong, right? So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to give it a 5 as well. I'll give it a 5 out of 5 slices across the chest.
Nice. Okay. Rasco, I pulled a U, and I forgot to look up a fan... Oh, wait, no, I take that back. I know what fan film we're talking about, but I kind of forget the name, so I'm going to look it up real quick. Okay, next week we'll be talking about Crazy Puddin', Joker and Harley Quinn's Reality. By Geeks and Gains Media. So this should be an interesting fan film to discuss. I have mixed feelings on it. All right, that'll do it for this week's episode of Geeky Gentlemen. Everyone, thank you very, very much for watching. Until next time, I'm the Philosopher.
And I'm the beta male cuck.
And we are your Geeky Gentlemen. And we will be discussing things.